Likes to write a lot about student interest. I think a big factor of whether or not a language activity will be successful is if students are motivated or interested in what is going on. And points to both open-endedness and personalization as two big components to hopefully raise student interest. In terms of open-endedness, we're talking about responses that allow students to supply their own responses of any length that they wish. So rather than saying you have to fill in one word blank, that's more of a closed ended. It's something that allows us students of higher level to make more complex utterances and students of lower level to produce shorter utterances. But that is up to the student, not just based on the structure of the activity. And then talks a lot about personalization. Here is one example of how an activity lacks personalization. I found this in a activity book called Shenanigans, in which the activity describes Carol's Day. In this activity, one student has a list of activities that Carol does on a given day, and the other student has to put the pictures in order. It's a kind of listening activity. However, the only problem I have with this activity, it sounds great, but who the hell is Carol? I don't know. My students don't know, and nobody cares. Another way to change this would be to have students very briefly at first write down their own schedule, maybe 4 events that they would like to do on a perfect day. And then students can ask each other questions about, oh, what are you doing at 2 o'clock? Or, oh, what are you doing after lunch? You could also leave blank spaces to allow students to invite each other to parties. I did this once in class, and students seemed to have a really good time mingling and asking each other, oh, can you go to my party, Yeonju? Oh no, I'm so sorry. I'm going to Gichan's party at 2 o'clock, but what about at 4 o'clock? It's just a way to allow students to sort of insert themselves into the activity rather than doing an activity around some fictional character that they might not even know about. Solid speaking activities can also introduce pleasurable tension. This is another way to ratchet up motivation. So, this can mean that the activity itself is a game, but doesn't necessarily have to be. There should also be, because there could also just be some kind of goal in mind. So, for example, maybe your task is to write 10 sentences using comparatives. You could also introduce time constraints to add a little bit of tension. Okay, now write as many comparative sentences as you can in 5 minutes. Or you could also even have a little bit of implicit competition, not necessarily something for the sake of winning, but something for the sake of trying to outdo yourself, trying to compete against your own limitations. For example, okay, everybody, we have 6 groups. Let's see who can write the most comparative sentences in 5 minutes. All of these are ways to add pleasurable tension or urgency to a language activity. In her book, writes about the idea of pace, but she specifically says that pace is different from speed. The way that she defines it, if an exercise has pace, it means that the class is occupied with a steady flow of interesting stimuli to respond to, together with a feeling of constant progress towards the objective of the activity. If, however, there are frequent interruptions, delays, or digressions, the pace will flag, and the activity produce less volume of language practice and all of the problems associated with boredom. So in this case, pace doesn't mean that the activity is moving very quickly in terms of speed, but it means that students are consistently able to produce different volumes of language and continually make progress towards a given goal. So pace is a little bit more about steadiness of engagement rather than speed of progress. So pace is something to keep in mind as you design or execute your lessons.